All right, guys, so we're going to start with the camera settings. So camera settings are the most important things to know in this module. When you're learning how to film, you need to know the camera settings, right? You can know everything about this, about that, but if you don't know, you can be a creative person, but if you don't know how to, maneuver your settings, then what differentiates you from other people? Nothing. So you need to know your camera settings, so that way, if like, it's like this, guys. Once you know the camera settings, you can pretty much operate any camera. You can pretty much you know compose a shot with any camera. So it's kind of like driving. Once you know the fundamentals of driving, once you learn how to drive, you can pretty much drive any car with that's manual, as if you learn how to drive a manual. And you can pretty much drive any car that's automatic if you learn how to drive an automatic car. If you're given a Benz, which is automatic, you can drive it. You're given a Kia, you can drive it. So it's the same thing. The fundamentals are the same. You just need to learn how to work the settings. So same thing like a bike. Once you get to know how to balance a bike, you can pretty much ride any other bike. All you need to do is learn how to balance the thing, right? So same thing with the camera. Once you learn how to work the settings in a camera, you can pretty much operate any camera. Canon, Nikon, settings are the same, guys. And the most important things are these three things you need to know. These, right? These three things. So the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. These are the only three things you need to know in order to operate any camera out there. So these three things, which is the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO, guys. So once you know how these three things work, then you can pretty much operate any camera on earth, okay? Because all cameras have just those three settings, like the fundamentals. Once you can set a camera's composition based on those three. So composition is how your image comes out, right? How you compose your image. So the way you compose your image, you have to deal with these three things, which is the shutter speed, the ISO, and the aperture. But if you're just getting started into filmmaking, like a lot of people, a lot of consumers, they just throw that thing in automatic, right? Like everybody now can, like, a lot of people could drive automatic, but they can't actually drive a stick. They can't drive manual, but they can drive an automatic, right? And they've been driving for years, and you put them in a manual, they're like, how does this work? So you have to know how to work the thing in manual, right? So same thing with a camera. You have to know how to work the manual settings of the camera. So once you know how these three work, then you can pretty much operate a camera in manual, right? So the camera is automatically setting these three for you, which is the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. But once you do it by yourself, you put the camera in manual, you are, setting these three things to your liking. So shutter speed, what does the shutter speed do? So shutter speed just controls the camera's shutter. Where's my camera here? The shutter speed controls the camera shutter. So the shutter is a thing that goes, like, it flicks it to take a picture. It just like, so the slower the shutter speed, the more blurry your action, your movement is. So if somebody's walking and you have a low shutter speed, let's say like 60, 50, all the way going down. If somebody's moving fast, you're going to see the blur in that image. So because the shutter speed is moving slow, so if it's moving fast, you're not going to be able to see any blur. Okay, so if you set it to like 100 going up, mostly like 100, 125 going up, you're not going to see any blur, right? So which is kind of not normal, because if you see a car going by, if you look at it, you can see the blur in your eye, right? Even when you go like this, like you can't pretty much see the blur, but it's there. Okay, so same thing with the camera. Okay, guys, so that's the shutter speed. So it controls the speed of the shutter going, opening and closing. Okay, guys, so the faster the shutter speed, the less blur the image has. The slower the shutter speed, or the lower the shutter speed, the more blur you see. So that's the shutter speed. So I have all the what is that? I have the definitions of all these down in the thing in this section, in the topic section. So shutter speed is the length of time the camera shutter is open, exposing light onto the camera sensor. Okay. So the aperture. So the aperture controls the amount of light that passes through the lens to your camera sensor. That's what the aperture does. Okay, guys, so e.g., the wider the hole, the more light. So that's what the aperture does. So the aperture just controls the amount of light that comes into your camera via the lens. So it's all about the lenses. So the more expensive lenses have the lower depth of field. Okay, they have the more shallow depth of field, which means they have apertures like 1.2, 1.4. So those apertures, they're shallow. They're shallower depth of field, hence creating a blurry background or foreground because they're shallow. I don't know how to explain this, but so they're more shallow. But I have an image here illustrating I have an aperture illustration. When you go down, I have the diagrams, so you can see what this does, what the aperture does. Let's say you're focusing on that person. The more low you bring it, the more open the camera lens is. As you can see down here, the illustrations. So that's what the aperture does. So the aperture also affects the field. It affects the area that is in focus. So the more wide open the lens is, the shallower the focus area is. Okay, guys, and the more closed the lens is, the area of focus becomes wide. So if you want like a lot of stuff in focus in your picture, then you have to be at least like f8 going up, so that way you have more field and more field of more in focus. So the more it goes down, the less things you can put, the less the space that you need to that is in focus. So I'll give you examples of this in this video as I talk, but you kind of get the point. Okay, guys. Okay, so let's move on to ISO. So what is the ISO? What does the ISO do? So the ISO, it just controls, it's like the image senses sensitivity to light. So it controls the amount of how bright a picture is. Like it controls how bright or dark a picture is. So that's just the in-body, the sensor on the camera. So the sensor on the camera, controls that brightness of the image that's being captured. Okay, guys, and the higher you go in ISO, the more grainy the picture quality is, and the lower the ISO, the more crisp the image is. So just put in mind, guys, if you can still get the same image with a lower ISO, I recommend that. But if you can't and have to bump your ISO up, then do that. But just put in mind, like the more you're going up in the ISO, the more worse the image is becoming. That's why cameras that have good ISO qualities at higher ISO counts are expensive, such as the Sony A7S III. It's a good camera. It's a good low light camera, but that comes with a hefty price. So all the cameras that are good in low light, they're more expensive because they're good in low light. So hey, but yeah, so that's what the ISO does. The ISO is just it has to do with the camera. So the camera has to be a good camera for it to have a good ISO in low light. So the ISO just controls the brightness of the image. So you can lower or higher this, but like I said, the higher you go up on the ISO, the worse your image becomes, and I've illustrated that in the diagrams below, guys. So that's pretty much it, guys. So for the camera settings, you just need to know these three things: the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. So I will attach more information to this section, and I also have the manual focus and autofocus information. So go down there and read what manual focus is and what autofocus is. Pretty much self-explanatory, but for those of you guys who are like new to film, I'll kind of be throwing these things in there. You know, it might be helping some of you guys. So that's what that is. So like for blurry background, let's say you want a blurry background, you need to set your aperture low. So like 1.8, 2.8, 1.2. So the lower your aperture, the shallower what's going to be in focus. So the shallower what's going to be in focus, which means whatever you set your focus on, everything else will be either blurry or, well, it's going to be blurry, right? So if you're focusing on, let's say, my fingers here, then everything this side and everything that side is going to be blurry, right? So the shallower your aperture, like a 1.2, 8, 2.8, like, the lesser. So that's why if you're taking like a group picture or a group video, you need to have your aperture on like f10, 12 going up, because if you have it on like 2.8, some people will be in focus, a few people will be in focus, and some people won't be on focus depending on where they're standing. If they're standing like maybe a little bit in front of the other people in focus, they won't be in focus. If they're standing a little bit back, so it just controls the area where people stand. So I have examples on this. So yeah, so let's move on to the lighting techniques, guys.